Maybe you're interested in collecting Atari ST hardware like the hardware you see here, but you don't necessarily know where to start. What's needed? How to get going? Well, if that's the case, then this video is for you. Let's talk about this. All right, so while I mentioned previously that this video is for those who are looking to just start a collection, the fact is a collection of Atari ST specifically hardware. You may have other vintage computers, etc., but my intent is to talk about Atari STs. Many of you may already have your own collection of Atari ST hardware. Please watch this video and also comment and share your experiences and some of the learnings you've had as you've gone through this journey. My journey started about a decade ago, in 2014 kind of time frame, when I started collecting these computers. And I took a very roundabout way to get to getting these computers functioning, and you know, thinking about what I absolutely had to have, and not really understanding that there are different paths to get to the functionality that I needed or wanted as an individual. So what I would say is the first question you need to ask yourself is why? Why are you wanting to collect these computers? Are you looking to enjoy some of the software from that time? Are you looking to hear that sound, have that tactile feeling of inserting a disc, popping it out, hearing the disc drive running, the nostalgia aspect of it? Ask yourself those kinds of questions. There's a lot of different reasons. Pretty much there's a different number of reasons for every individual. But I would say one of the main reasons why people want to get working with these computers, testing them out, playing around with them, etc., is really to play games and experience that fun they had growing up as a child, maybe a child. Maybe you were an adult at the time. I was a child. But there's a lot of different ways you can do that, right? So one of the easiest and lowest barriers to entry is that of emulation. And what I started part of my journey soon after I got my first Raspberry Pi, I installed, RetroPie. Yeah, it's RetroPie on it. And I was looking at it and thinking, wow, there's Nintendo on here. The Nintendo, I could play the Nintendo 8-bit, the original NES system games. And as I was scrolling through the various different wheel of emulators that were on it, Atari ST was on it. And I kind of went down that rabbit hole because I wanted to see the software that I experienced and I really enjoyed. 3D printed out a case. This is running a version of RetroPie on it today. And it's a great way to experience the software aspect of it. You don't have to worry about difficulties or incompatibilities in hooking up with a monitor. You don't have to worry about trying to find the right kind of mouse because you got a USB mouse or a USB controller. This is a very low barrier to entry in order to get started. You can use a Raspberry Pi, you can use your own desktop computer. If you're watching this video, you probably have a computer that could actually emulate Atari ST software. Atari is a great emulator. I just wanted to kick that off because, a lot of folks will think that there's a very high barrier to entry. The hardware can be a high barrier to entry, but there's ways to get what you want in a different fashion. All right, as we talk about the Atari STs and what to consider as you start looking at potentially collecting these, there's a couple of very specific things you need to look at. Number one, the base system and specifications. The Atari ST line of computers had a couple of different CPUs that are available. The vast majority of them had a Motorola 68000 CPU in them. So that by itself, pretty much all of them are fine, right? And you'll be able to run pretty much every software bit. You can actually upgrade. Some of them have a 16 megahertz. A Mega ST have a 16 megahertz CPU in them. You have the Atari TT, which is a 32 megahertz 68030. You have the Atari Falcon that has a 16 megahertz 6830. There's some options available in addition to accelerators, et cetera, et cetera. But really focusing on the base systems, the Motorola 68000 is perfectly fine. One other system element to be thoughtful of is the operating system for the Atari ST. The Atari STs, for the most part, have their operating systems in a ROM on the main board, as you can see here. In this case, this is a 6-chip ROM. There exists some 2-chip ROMs as well. These range from an initial TOS 1.0 or pre-TOS 1.0, where only part of the operating system was in ROM, and then some of it had to be loaded from a boot disk. I quickly reverted or transitioned over to all of the operating system in ROM, and taught with TOS 1.0, 1.2, 1.4 for the Atari STFs, and then for the STEs, 1.6 or 1.62, which had some bug fixes in it, and then 2.06 in general for the STEs. There exist some other versions as well, but in general, you want to be looking for a TOS 1.04 or be able to go to a TOS 1.04 or 1.62 or higher at some point, from a compatibility standpoint as well as from a functionality standpoint. In general, the TOS 1.04 or 1.06 or higher have much better compatibility and less issues with hard drives, the various different hard drives that exist, and then also have good compatibility backwards with the early software. There exists some random software here and there that is not compatible. And then if you wanted to look at TOS 2.06, there's some cool little features that are added to that as well, but it also adds some more compatibility issues with older software. All right, after the CPU, the next thing to consider is the amount of RAM in these computers. The Atari STs, in general, really run for anywhere from a half a megabyte up to 4 megabytes of RAM. Yes, there was the Atari 260 ST that may have had a quarter of a megabyte of RAM, 256K. I think most of them actually were upgraded to at least half a meg to 512K or even 1 megabyte of RAM. But that said, in general, the vast majority of Atari STs you're going to run into half a megabyte to 4 megabytes. And in reality, those that comes stock are the vast majority are the 520 STs and 1040 STs, which have half a megabyte and 1 megabyte correspondingly. And in general, I would highly recommend at least 1 megabyte of RAM. Half a megabyte is fine for most games and most disk loading games, but if you ever wanted to use a hard drive, you really kind of need at least 1 megabyte of RAM in order to really get the benefit from it. We'll talk about more ways you can upgrade these in another video, but fact is half a megabyte to 4 megabytes, pick a megabyte if you can. All right. After the RAM, the next thing to consider is input. How are you going to get software on these things? And this is a little more potentially involved because these floppy disk drives, whether it's an external or an internal, you need floppy disks. Some floppy disks are still good, and you may be able to find some relatively easily on eBay or other sources, but you don't have to buy floppy disks in order to get the software. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. There is some archives on the Internet Archive with the Atari TOSEC with a whole slew of imaged floppy disks that you can actually write to floppy disks using some various different software and potentially some tools like a grease weasel or whatnot. And that allows you to create your own floppy disks. And that is one approach, and a fantastic approach at that. The second approach, as I'm going to show this here, this is an external version of a GoTech. A GoTech, it basically takes a USB stick, flash drive, with those disk images on it, and allows you to select in between them and emulates a floppy disk drive. This is a fantastic way, especially as you're starting to build up a library of software you want to play, have access to, use, run, etc. A GoTech is a fantastic way. There's GoXs and there's a number of different other solutions that exist, but this is one of those good solutions. In addition to floppy disk drives. There's also a new device, which is a fantastically cool device. I have a video on it that I put out a few months ago called the Side Cart. And this device actually is a cartridge that fits in the cartridge slot. It uses a Raspberry Pi Pico, I think is what it is, and you're able to actually load disk images from it. You can even run it as a hard drive potentially as well. There's a lot of pretty cool functionality with it. That's another solution for getting, again, software onto the computer so you can run it. In addition, Atari STs also had hard drives. You could pick up a legacy historical hard drive, or you could pick up something like this. This is a hard drive emulator. This is an Ultra Satan. I love this guy. The name is kind of weird, but whatever. This allows you to actually use a flash disk, a micro SD or SD card, and access this as a hard drive and run software from that, which is fantastic. Another easy way to potentially get software onto these computers. These were designed, for the most part, to run most of their software from floppy disk, but a lot of that software has been adapted to be able to run on a hard disk. And that's actually how I access most of my software today. I still like to use floppy disks, about a third of the time or so, but most of the stuff I run from hard disk for the sake of convenience. Those are the primary ways in which you get software running. All right, the next thing, input devices. Now, we're all used to a mouse today. We use mice when accessing computers, and Atari STs also had mice as well. You can use an Atari original ST mouse, the STM1. Great mouse. It's got a roller ball. It looks like a tank, or a Tesla Cybertruck probably is a better way to put it. They're pretty reliable, pretty robust. You can find them, but again, that's another cost. On the other hand, you can also find adapters such as this that allows you to plug in a PS2 mouse, which is fantastic. There are similar versions of that also allow for a USB type mouse, or even what I like to use with my Falcon is I use what's called a mouster with the ST capitalized that allows you to plug in wireless mice or wireless controllers. You're also going to want, if you want to play games, you'll probably want something like this. You'll need to pick up a controller. There are a lot of different types of controllers that you can find out there. There are some replicas that are available that use the Atari, whatever you want to call this, however many pins, 9 pins, yeah, 9-pin connector. And this is another thing you need to be aware of that you're going to want to have and you're going to need to find and source. All right, one more thing associated with the input devices, right? You need the joystick and mouse. And in some instances, with some of these desktop style rather than the all-in-one style computers, you're likely going to need a keyboard. Well, you will need a keyboard. Many of them are sold without a keyboard. So sourcing a keyboard is something else that you're going to need. In the case of, say, a 520 ST, 1040 ST, or STE, you got a keyboard built in. It's right then and there. You may have to work on it, fix it a little bit, but in general, these are very robust. You got the keyboard. All right, so we have the computer itself. We have a way to get data onto the running from the computer, a floppy disk, hard disk emulator, a side cart. You have that. Then you also have an input device. You have your mouse and your joystick or some other adapted version, modern version to run on the computer. Great, you're there. No, you're not. Next step, all right? And the next step you're going to need is you're going to need to get something to display an image out on. And the Atari ST monitors, I love these guys. I think they're fantastic. They have a beautiful screen. They're small, but buying one, shipping one is not an easy thing to do. You can buy it on eBay. You can get it shipped on eBay. The shipping is pretty pricey in order to get that shipped. And you also run the risk of these things are not exactly massively robust. The computers themselves are pretty robust. Monitors are heavy, fragile, etc. So you're going to have to figure out how to do that. Many of these Atari STs also have an RF modulator out. So if you're fine running it on a TV through an RF modulator, more power to you. I don't think the image typically is the best, but hey, it's a way to get an image out, right? So that's built in. You just need a connector. You need an RF input on your TV. Great. Monitor, RF input. There are other solutions as well, right? You can also get one of these kinds of things. This is Atari ST to VGA. So you have a VGA output on here. This does not connect up, or it can connect to any VGA controller, or cord, but not all monitors will display the Atari ST signal. Whatever monitor you pick has to be capable of displaying a 15 kilohertz display output. Yes, output. and many can, but not all can. So you have to be thoughtful about which LCD or modern monitor solution you want to connect to something like this. Another option to use with one of these VGA outputs, Atari ST to VGA outputs, is to connect it to something like some sort of upscaler. An open source scan converter is what I use with my monitor solution. I have a number of 15 kilohertz monitors and screens, which is wonderful, but for my main one, I actually use an OSSC, open source scan converter, which is a fantastic way to convert this to HDMI. There are RGB to HDMI solutions. Those require a bit of soldering. So it's a little leveling up of your skills. If you have the skills to do it, awesome. If you don't, other solutions are available. And this is probably one of the most common solutions for those who are in Europe. You have this thing called SCART, wonderful. And there's great Atari ST to SCART connectors. This also can go into an open source scan converter as well. Again, these are options, but you have to be aware you're going to want a video signal out. And you don't have to have a monitor. This was one of my first mistakes when I was first starting collecting Atari STs, is I thought I had to have a monitor. And the first group of material that I got, I was dead set on making sure I had a monitor. And I probably overpaid for everything that I got because I thought that's what I had to have. I use them. I don't use them as my daily drivers when I'm actually doing Atari ST. I use them just for fun, right? So wanted to throw that out there as just a lesson learned from my side. All right, we have the computer. We have a way to get programs and software loaded. We have a way to input through a mouse or joystick. We also have video out now. What else do we need? Well, it's a pretty important thing, and oftentimes Atari STs will have issues with this, and that's you need power. This right here is a power supply that I built myself for the 520 ST. 520 STs, these shorter stack computers, they have an external power supply, so you'll need to make sure you have one. If you can find one that's original, they're generally pretty good. The original ones, I've not had any issues with them myself. You can always recap them, that's great. But most of the time when I've seen these for sale, say on eBay and whatnot, they don't have a power supply. That's been lost to the ethers of wherever, in the sands of history. So either building your own power supply or sourcing one. There are secondhand, or you can get some secondhand, or you can find third-party folks that have built similar kinds of PSUs for sale on eBay and other places. That's something that you need to consider. Now, when you're looking at the computers, these bigger ones, right? So those that have the power supply internal to them that you see here. In many instances, I wouldn't say most instances, well, I'd say about 50-50 from my experience. About 50% of the time, the PSUs in these are either non-functional or on their way out non-functional. Can they destroy the computer? Maybe, maybe not. I've not seen anything that's been a smoking gun with the PSUs actually destroying a computer. These computers are fantastically robust. All right. However, they will not run if the PSU isn't working. So you need to make certain you have a PSU that you can work. You can recap it yourself, which is a perfectly valid solution. There are third-party, again, PSUs, internal PSUs that you can buy online from, there's a Centurion store, there's Exos's web store where you can buy the various different PSUs. those are great sources as well. You need some minimal soldering skills, but they're relatively simple to set up. Or you can build your own again. There are available PSUs, modern PSUs, mean well power supplies that you can actually wire up relatively easily. It's actually not too difficult to do. Again, I've done it in a number of videos that I've put together in the past that you can just check my video history. But you need to have a power supply that you can rely on, either through recapping, through building your own, or buying a third party, or you can have someone else build one for you. But you need something to actually provide the power. And in most instances, when you buy one of these, I'd say it's probably about 50-50. It's a kind of a crapshoot whether or not the PSU is going to work. Others who have collected them, comment below. But that's going to probably be one of the biggest situations with these computers that you're going to have to rectify. All right, with all of that, what do I recommend at this point in time, right? So if you want to get an Atari ST and collect one and get started as quickly as possible, what should you go for? There's a lot of options here, and there's a lot of options that are out there. But I'm going to talk United States specifically. In Europe, I think there's a little bit of difference there. But in the United States, I would recommend one of these. This is an Atari 1040 ST. This gets you a couple of things. I'll put this back so I'm not potentially dropping this at some point. The 1040 ST, number one, it has the 68,000 CPU. Great, wonderful. Number two, it has 1 megabyte of RAM. At least, and in general, most of them just have 1 megabyte of RAM, which is sufficient and good. 3, it has the power supply internally, so you don't have to find a new power supply. You may have to recap it, you may have to replace it with a modern one, but it's internal, it's captive. Next, floppy disk drive. It's internal. You may have to clean it, you may have to refurbish it to get it started and working properly. But again, it's in there. And not only that, if it's not working, you can easily replace it with a GoTech. All the power, all of the connectors are already there. Contrast that to an external floppy disk drive. An external floppy disk drive, not only do you need the floppy disk drive, you need a power supply. There's an external power supply for the external floppy drive. And not only the external power supply do you need, you also need this cable here. This floppy cable. And if you look at these pins, you can probably make your own, but these cables are hard to find. And they typically sell for way more than they're worth for a straight pass-through cable with just some pins on the end, right? There are those who have put together things that are available for it, but it just adds more cost and more steps in order to get yourself up and running. Again, why I recommend the 1040 STF. Now, if you're in Europe, the STF is not your only option, but it's a great option for you as well. But you have another option. You have the 1040 STEs. You have those in the United States, but they're much less common in the United States. I wouldn't call them rare, but they're much less common in the United States. In Europe, there are a lot more Atari STEs that were available, that are still available for sale. And so that's another option for you as well. So 1040 STF or 1040 STE are probably the sweet spot for your first Atari ST computer to collect, for those reasons listed, right? It helps with, at least with the power supply being internal. You don't have to hunt one down and find all the plugs and whatnot to build your own. That's a little more advanced than recapping one. And then you also have the internal floppy disk drive with all the connectors. It's not just the disk drive itself, but it's the connectors, the power connector that's internal to the computer, as well as the ribbon cable inside the computer as well. That's why that one's the sweet spot. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this. Hopefully it helps out a little bit, and if nothing else, it helps others avoid some of the mistakes that I made in thinking that I had to go a certain path when there's lots of other paths available when it comes to video output, data input, etc. And so, at the end of the day, the objective is to have that nostalgic feeling. In my mind, the clunk of the floppy disk, the sound of the floppy drive. I could take or leave the CRT scan line, so I like having a big screen. getting older, my eyes are getting not as good, so having a bigger screen is helpful. But the objective is to really have fun.